It was an ordinary day in the lively city of Konoha. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, the kanai of the local academy students shined in the bright sunlight. All in all, it was a pleasant afternoon. The weather had been good so far this year. Winter wasn't as cold as usual and summer came early, bringing with it warm air and cool breezes. The bright blonde hair of a neon orange-clad boy bounced with every step as he strode towards his rundown apartment. Even the glares of icy hatred penetrating the hyperactive child were quite normal on a day such as this. But Naruto Uzumaki paid no mind to the harsh gazes, not anymore. He walked with confidence in every step as he made his way to his home, ignoring the occasional taunt and the audible hushed whispers from behind his back. Upon reaching his ransacked dwelling, he let out a sigh of frustration. Being sure to lock the door, he laid on his bed, stretched, then slammed his pillow over his face and screamed into it. "Goddamn Sasuke," his muffled voice decried the popular academy student. "Thinks he's so fucking great just because he's an Uchiha. Fucker pisses me off." He took several deep breaths through his comforter to calm down before removing it from his face. He needed to vocalize his frustration from time to time, and this method suited the bill just fine. "What the hell does everyone see in him?" He continued his rant mentally. "So, what if he looks so cool? That's not what being a ninja's about. And he's a showboater with no sense of teamwork. There's nothing professional about him. Hell, even Shikamaru's got more innate talent than he does, and he doesn't even lift a finger, literally." After his internal monologue, he sat up and composed himself. "Well," he thought out loud, "time to get to work." He leapt off his bed and made his way to the farthest corner of his apartment. A long time ago, he discovered that the room below his didn't actually extend to this corner, and instead, there was a mere concrete column that acted as a secondary support to that portion of the building. Placing his hands on the floor over the pillar and sending a bit of chakra into it, a panel that blended in perfectly with the messy ground dropped inward, revealing a somewhat spacious hole that he had dug and lined with steel bars in order to maintain the integrity of the building. After checking the automatic traps that reacted only to chakra other than his own, he smirked and climbed down the hole, setting the floor panel back into place above him. He slid down the hollow aluminum ladder all the way down the structure, completely concealed by the pillar. As he descended, he made sure to check the seals lining the vertical tunnel to make sure they hadn't corroded. These seals he was particularly proud of, alongside the standard explosive tags that he lined inside the hole in case he ever needed to hide his location, sat special markings that projected a powerful combination of ninjutsu and genjutsu. In a nutshell, these seals kept anyone from detecting that the column was hollow. Satisfied that his protective measures were stable, he reached the bottom of the ladder and proceeded through a trap-laden door to his private chamber about 20 feet below ground level. As proud as he was of his hole, this room made it look like a kid's summer project. It wasn't particularly large, perhaps another 20 square feet more than his shitty apartment, but it was all in the spacing. With the exception of the bathroom and a few closets, it was a single square room lined with everything he needed: weapon lockers, bookcases lined with books and scrolls, and even a small forge alongside a scrap metal dump. "Let's see," he muttered to no one while cracking his knuckles. "Where's it gonna be today?" He strode over to a set of mirrors and took a seat while pulling his gaudy jacket off. After that, he removed his shirt and observed his upper arms with an acknowledging nod. He then turned his back to the largest set of mirrors to see the seals he had tattooed so long ago behind his shoulders. Grasping the needle and saturating the tip with ink, he moved his right arm forward and began applying another seal over his tricep, checking the mirrors to make sure he didn't make a mistake. Tattooing a flawless pattern in awkward positions on oneself with only the help of mirrors was difficult, but history had proven that he could do it. Today's tattoos were storage seals, much like the large, intricate body art over his shoulder blades. The large inkworks on his back already stored dozens of weapons each. The blonde boy thought it appropriate to only seal large weapons in them, such as swords, spears, windmill shuriken, and even a pair of scythes. He completed the seal on the back of his right upper arm and began another on the left. These were intended for smaller weapons such as kunai, shurikens, senbon needles, hell, maybe even a chain or two to mix things up a bit. After finishing the second seal, he left the miniature station and walked over to his extensive weapon lockers. He opened one of the slim metal doors to reveal rows upon rows of throwing stars, knives, and needles, all neatly lined up to conserve space. He took several dozen of each weapon and systematically sealed them into his new tattoos. Now, he thought, to test them. He walked over to a closet, opened it up, and changed his clothes. Instead of the neon orange he wore to maintain his image as the village idiot, he now wore something far less conspicuous. His jacket had a simple camouflage pattern, and his long, deep red shorts hung loosely well below the knees. He exchanged his blue sandals for a modified pair of Geta sandals with belts that firmly strapped the footwear to him and steel plates screwed into the bottoms. To complete the disguise, he donned the scratched mask of a treacherous ANBU who fell victim to one of his traps a few years back. Of course, he added his own touch to the visage, attaching a deep red mane to conceal his blonde hair and one-way mirrored lenses to hide his brilliant azure eyes from the world. He added one last safeguard to his identity in case his mask should falter and break, a red cloth that covered his face from the nose down. He had noticed a local ninja with the same getup, and it was amazing what a little extra clothing could do. He secured his hidden chamber from the inside and pulled up a floorboard to reveal a grate. After going through the necessary precautions of his seals and traps, he dropped into the tunnel that was below his secret room. Strangely enough, this passage was already here when he constructed his second home all those years ago, but no one ever seemed to use them other than him and an unknown rival. It drove him nuts that there was something he didn't know, but that was why he was here. When he first began to wander the mysterious tunnels, there was nary a soul other than him around. But shortly after his treks began, he ran into someone. That person was accompanied by two others who appear human but looked off with their multiple scars, stitches, and mechanical enhancements. He didn't get a good look at the leader's face, but he soon learned in later encounters that it was a female of short stature. His term for the fellow opponent was silence, due to the fact that she managed to sneak up on him more times than he'd care to admit. As they encountered each other more, their following skirmishes turned into fights, which quickly led to battles befitting of real ninjas. He knew that the next step was having battles of epic proportions that would create legends. He vowed to himself that he would unearth the mystery of the opposing genius before becoming Hokage and charged into the darkness. A blue-haired girl walked through the clean halls of the mansion with drooping shoulders. To anyone watching, Hinata Hyuga was the embodiment of depression. After all, who wouldn't be hopelessly grim if one's own family looked down on them for no justifiable reason? She continued down the hall, avoiding anyone she encountered with careful precision until she exited the grounds. Once out of her oppressive home, she dejectedly made her way to one of the districts across Konoha until she reached her intended destination. Producing a key, she opened the door to the abandoned storage room she secretly took over. Anyone who ever noticed her presence disregarded it, seeing as how her position as an esteemed clan member within the village caused people to respect her, even if only because of the title. After locking the door behind her, she uncovered a hidden steel door in the floor and descended the crude wooden stairs underneath. She shut the metal covering and placed her hand over the seal in its center, activating the ever-constant genjutsu that kept it hidden from all eyes, even those of the Byakugan and Sharingan. She strode down the suspended stairs over the dredged hallway and reached another heavy door, then peered into a small flashing red light while placing her thumb over a small nib next to the large handle. The nib pricked her finger to extract the smallest of blood samples, and the light blinked twice rapidly in acknowledgement of its creator. The hydraulics that held the covering in place whined as they loosened, and the Hyuga girl entered the chamber. "Good evening, Mistress Hinata," two voices said simultaneously as their owners bowed. "Good evening," she returned happily. "Shirori, Aikiru. Any new reports?" Shirori began with a glint of joy in her cold yet warm eyes. "I've collected the samples you asked for." Good, good, the Hyuga said as she removed her oversized jacket and replaced it with an ivory lab coat. She honestly hated the hoodie, but she needed it to keep up the mask of a shy, introverted preteen. Any news on Curse? Nothing yet, mistress, Aikuru answered, his ever-present twitch of the cheek accompanying him. He's either been laying low or covering his tracks better. It's probably the latter, she remarked. That bastard's always getting smarter with each encounter. She pulled out a slide of a biological sample from an old freezing container and placed it under a microscope. Just make sure your brains aren't damaged. What about the rest of us? Her female attendant asked with way too much enthusiasm. Doesn't matter, so much. I can always put you back together again. She adjusted the device before her, then turned to her idle helpers. Anything new on the monitors? Well, no. You know the drill, she scolded lightly. Her subordinates were special, and as such needed continuous direction for their duties. Continue to map out the tunnels. If anyone other than Curse finds you, avoid detection at all costs. I won't be able to help you if you're taken in. What if we encounter Curse? Aikuru questioned. Do what you always do, try to buy time until I can get there. Now get going, she ordered with benevolent command. When the attendants left through the secured opening they opened a few years back, Hinata sighed, happy that the duo's conditions were steadily improving, even if they could never be fully normal again. At an extremely young age, the Hyuga found she had a propensity for two things in particular, the medical field and the acquisition of information. She immensely enjoyed the study of all things relating to the physical body and went out of her way to gather knowledge about anything simply because it made her giddy with joy. But when her father threatened her core interests by pushing the clan's traditional ways on her, she rebelled in the best of ways, secretly. She didn't flat out refuse the training he gave her, but rather chose not to excel in front of him, knowing that her succession as the family head would severely handicap her opportunities in life. Interestingly enough, she found the lessons of the gentle fist and its various techniques quite simple, and she took extra measures to ensure that she truly learned the moves in her spare time away from prying eyes. At the same time, she understood that merely seeming to not properly grasp the techniques was not enough to ensure her denial of her future clan position, so she donned the constant illusion of a shy, unconfident, introverted girl. It wasn't a simple task by far, if only because she wanted to clock almost everyone she knew due to their incredible stupidity and short-sightedness. She couldn't stand most of the kids at the academy. They were all just so frickin' dumb. Especially all those girls who fawned over the Uchiha because he was self-centered. Douchebag. The only people she even remotely respected were Naruto Uzumaki and Irika Yumino. Naruto because he honestly tried his best even if he was an idiot, and Irika because he wasn't a jackass to the poor boy like everyone else. When she first discovered the abandoned storage room and built her hidden chamber, she began conducting her own research. Most of her studies involved things like biology, genetics, and advanced machinery, but she stumbled across another pastime which transformed her life for the better: espionage. She kept her spying strictly within safe boundaries in case her devices were ever traced back to her, something which in and of itself was highly unlikely. If such a thing were to happen, she would, at worst, be fined severely and potentially watched haphazardly for the remainder of her days, or at least until she could avoid detection altogether. During her early days of monitoring things of interest, one of her favorite locations was the Konoha Hospital, second only to the inner workings of the Hokage Tower. One of her watched patients was a branch family member, a man with the caged bird seal. While she felt sorry for the poor soul because his life was decided by others, she took great interest in his case. The man was desperately ill and always on the verge of slipping into a coma. One day, it actually happened, and before the nurses could respond to the alarm set off by the lack of brainwaves, he passed away. That was the day the young girl made a fascinating discovery of the oppressive seal. She had read from her family's archives that the mark only disappeared in death, taking with it the abilities of the Byakugan. When the man slipped into brain death, the seal faded away, but what was remarkable was that his body lived on for a short while before complications snuffed out its flame. The branch member was still alive by all biological standards. With this in mind, Hinata launched herself into a series of experiments to remove the seal from several ailing branch members. She was amazed and disgusted by how many of the subservient family were in dire need of treatment, yet kept under wraps by the main house. She conducted her trial runs in secret, most of which were failures. As time went on, she learned more and more about what needed to be done and, eventually, succeeded. Her landmark discovery resulted in the birth of Shiori, the first branch member to be rid of her cursed mark. Of course, in order to make such a thing possible, the blue-haired girl had to partially lobotomize her creation and replace many of the organs and body parts with other compatible materials, including several mechanical devices. Spurred on by her achievement, she produced Aikiru shortly afterwards. While having the revitalized Hyugas under her care and watchful eyes, she had them work with her on her many projects. Of course, they could only handle simple tasks, but it was more than welcome because it allowed the studious girl to concentrate on what she wanted. But as of a few years ago, a certain rivalry developed between her and another mysterious individual. It first began when she burrowed into the tunnels already under Konoha and encountered the person she came to coin Curse. Thankfully, the person didn't have a clear view of her face at the time, so her secret was safe for now. Nowadays, she lived for two things: becoming the most powerful shinobi in the village by her own power and proving herself the superior genius. Her eyes shot open when the speaker crackled to life and Shiori's voice broke through. "Mistress, we have encountered Curse," she stated calmly, proceeding to engage target and await your arrival. Hinata rushed over to the sea of monitors against the far wall and spotted the one corresponding to the camera behind Ikara's left eye to confirm the engagement. Sure enough, those clothes and mask gave it away. "All right," she said to herself to get pumped up for the upcoming fight. She shed the lab coat and donned the dark blue jacket she wore in combat with all its attached electrical and mechanical parts. Donning a mask of the same color and a beige cloth to cover her short hair, she opened the door to the adjacent tunnels and dashed through while it automatically closed behind her. The hunt was on, and she was looking for a good fight. Naruto was in the middle of heavy combat with the freaks, his term for the two unusual combatants he repeatedly encountered. It didn't seem to matter how many times he poisoned, stabbed, disemboweled, dismembered, or beheaded them. They always appeared again in the next battle. Fortune was on his side this evening. He managed to sneak up on the two reassembled Hyugas this time and take out the male after a few minutes with a windmill shuriken covered in explosive tags. The female, however, was a different story. She was obviously constructed for close quarters, although a few of her built-in features consisted of long-range weapons. She bent her legs against the opposite wall and lunged forward, shooting her left mechanical arm forward and opening the electrified claws at the fingertips. Curse countered with a wooden staff he removed from one of his large seals. The claws almost immediately splintered the thing, but it threw her aim off enough for the blonde genius to slash her artificial limb off with a broadsword. Her skills were obviously waning. Normally, she wouldn't lose that arm until much later. He backed off a few steps and chucked the sharpened remainder of his stick at her, using the distraction to pull a second broadsword from one of his shoulder blade seals. He then raised one leg closely against his body and moved his long, curved blades in front of him in a loose gesture. The female freak knelt on the ground with her right knee up. Her pants tore as a compartment opened and a steel tube filled with Senbon needles shot forward and blasted out the poison projectiles. The blonde immediately hit the ground on his back and spun himself out of the way with his feet, swinging and striking with his dual blades to deflect any stray needle. He recovered from the spin flawlessly and, using his momentum, sliced the woman's leg off from below the knee. She faltered when her support gave out, but before she could hit the ground, the other broadsword cleanly removed her head right above the stitches at the base of her neck. As the consistently revived body slumped to the tunnel floor, the blonde genius felt another presence rapidly approaching. He spun on his heel and struck two stakes out of the air before they plunged into him, denting his wonderfully light swords. So, he addressed his intelligent rival, resorting to this old trick again? Don't make me laugh, she replied, moving her index fingers down and loading another set of iron spikes into the launchers on her arms. Those damn blades of yours go hand in hand with this. She moved her hands down, pulling the wires and releasing the catch on her heavy projectile launcher. The metal stakes flew and, as their target moved his dented swords in position, suddenly flew apart into a hail of slivered shrapnel. Shit. Naruto cursed as he couldn't dodge in time and took a few large angular chunks to the chest. Ugh, I hate using this, he complained inwardly as he tapped into the demon fox's chakra and shot the embedded pieces back at his prodigy opponent. He had learned long ago about the source of the hating glares he received, realizing that the dark voice in the back of his head was not a normal thing. Hinata yelped as the shards flew back at her and she squatted to the ground. She grasped two circular devices on the front of her jacket and pushed the side buttons in, locking them temporarily into place. The large disc on her back, affectionately referred to as yin and yang by her, spun against its small support rails and released a burst of electricity, repelling any metal approximately 3 feet away from the machine. The disfigured shrapnel spun harmlessly back into the air and clattered to the ground. The Uzumaki used this time to move in and, twisting to the side in midair, brought his damaged blades down onto the Hyuga's metal stake launchers, denting them beyond use for the moment. She retaliated by fingering the loose wires at her wrists, yanking them free in such a way that his blades fell into them and twisting them around the curved weapons, trapping them in place. She moved her pinky fingers and touched the sensitive electrode draped under her hand, and a jolt of electricity surged through the wires and, by association, her opponent's metal swords. He released the energized weapons and leapt back, the steel bottoms of his Geta sandals clanging against the stone floor. He went into a horse dance and released his favorite sword, his custom ninjato. The straight blade had been lengthened to 5 feet, and the blue-haired prodigy noticed several new seals lining both sides. I've been working on this baby ever since you wrecked it, Curse stated with pride. Show me what you got. She grinned beneath her blue mask at his eagerness. You're not the only one with some new toys, she replied as she pulled the pins out of the supports that held yin and yang to her back and the device fell to the ground. She pulled the circular machines on her chest off and pressed the center buttons in. The large disc on the ground began to spin, and sharp barbs a foot long shot out of its hollowed center. She applied chakra to electrodes hidden within the machines in her hands, and the top of death began spinning like mad towards the blonde. He moved the sword to the ground to sweep yin and yang away, and it suddenly sprung up into his face. Shit. He cursed as he jabbed the blade upwards and caught the large top between two barbs, halting its midair attack. He tried to throw it to the side, but burning steam shot out at his face and propelled the device away. The heat would have been enough to score his face had it not been for the mask. Damn, that's cool, he exclaimed as he moved against the bladed disc. But I've got something new here. He jabbed the ninjato into the ground, and the seals along the side began to glow. He pulled the blade up in a vertical swinging motion, and a cord of rough stone stuck to the tip and whiplashed all the way down the hall to the Hyuga genius. Holy hell, she shouted as she recalled yin and yang and manipulated it to throw itself against the rock. She succeeded, but the whip knocked it to the side and kept on coming. She barely dodged the initial wave in the narrow tunnel, but her intelligent opponent began swinging his sword skillfully in the air, causing the impromptu cord to smash her against the wall and break half the machines in her possession. A small trickle of blood flowed from her mouth, but it was nothing serious. She tried to get up but was held down by the cold steel of her rival's Geta sandal while staring up against his extended sword. He smiled behind his modified mask. Looks like I won today. You're out of stuff, ain't ya? She glared back at him from behind her azure visage. I've still got equipment left. Nothing I haven't seen before. Make something better and take me on then, he said as he moved his free hand down to remove her mask. Now to find out. Ack! He retracted his hand and jumped back reflexively at the jolt of electricity that resided in a metal rim that was painted the same color of her disguise. Damn it, didn't see that, he thought before addressing his defeated opponent again. That was good, but you don't have any other options. I still won today. She coughed in response as she brought herself to her feet. He continued his mirrored gaze at her while resealing his favored blade behind his shoulder. It's frustrating to have someone I don't know about down here, but that makes things far more interesting. It's such a pain living with so many dumbass. Panting hard with the wind knocked out of her, she couldn't help but agree. You're the only person I can count on to keep me on my toes, Silence, he said before taking off into the darkness. Hinata stood there for a moment. Same for you, Curse, she returned before collecting her creation's parts. After gathering up most of the pieces, she realized that Shiori's mechanical arm was missing. You son of a bitch, she yelled with a touch of sarcasm to the empty tunnel, knowing full well that he would have it figured out by the next time they met. The next morning, Naruto was beaming as he usually did, except this time he was doing it in the privacy of his own home. He had beaten Silence the night before, and he was ecstatic. He didn't even have to use the full repertoire of his abilities, but then again she didn't delve into her collection of techniques either. He looked over at his alarm clock and realized he needed to get to the academy. As he walked down the street with his head held high and ignoring the whispers behind his back, he couldn't help but add a real smile to the mix of his outward mask. When he reached sight of the building, he remembered that the graduation exams were coming up again. Those were always a pain, but he figured that maybe he should try to pass this time. During the previous exams, he was too busy doing research and perfecting his weaponry styles to give much thought to the useless techniques used in the subgenin test. I mean, who the hell uses the clone technique? Those things are freaking useless, he ranted inwardly, equally frustrated that he couldn't actually pull off the worthless move. It really hurts trying to compress all my chakra down to just a simple non-existent clone. Maybe one of those shadow clones I've read about. He continued his mental discussion as he entered the classroom. He slumped down into the first seat available and scanned the classroom with azure eyes. Almost everyone here was horrifically incompetent. The only people who had any real potential, other than himself of course, were Shikamaru, Shino, and Hinata. He could tell the lazy boy was particularly smart. After all, the blonde was the master of disguises. Now, if only the Nara would lift a finger to do any actual work. The Aburame was a bit of a mystery, even to him. He knew all about his clan's insect techniques and how they housed bugs inside their members, and even most of the inherent strengths and weaknesses guarded closely by the family. It was their attitude that was the hardest of all to crack. They were incredibly secretive in their reactions to everything. Naruto figured his bug-using classmate for someone who had above-average intelligence and genuinely cared about his associates. All in all, good shinobi material. The Hyuga girl was the only female in his class worthy of being called a ninja. Despite her shy nature, she was reasonably intelligent, and her techniques, while sloppy in the opinion of her asshole family, were far more useful and versatile than any of the wannabe kunoichis. He wondered if her introverted tendencies would get in the way of missions or teamwork, but he had a feeling she could be serious if she tried. Besides, it made her kinda cute. He turned his head to notice the pink-haired girl he liked. In truth, he despised Sakura as much as he did Ino. Both were incredibly vain and wanted nothing more than to impress Sasuke. He figured that his idiot visage would go for her, but come on, who would want a girl as flat as a board with enough room on her forehead to sell ad space? Her personality sucked as well, but that was nothing unusual for the females in the room. It's all for Sasuke, he thought with a mental sneer when his teacher entered the room. All right, settle down, guys, Irika began as he checked off the roll in his hands. Hey, sit down, he commanded to a handful of kids in the back who were especially rowdy that day. When he finished the roster, he addressed the class on the genin exams coming up the next week. Irika. Now this guy Naruto liked, even if he was a little dim at times. The scarred Chunin didn't treat him like dirt like everyone else, and that was enough to earn the blonde's reserved respect. The only people he held in high regard other than his caring teacher were the grandfatherly-like Hokage, Old Man Tucci and his daughter at the Ichiraka ramen stand, and, of course, the prodigy rival he knew as Silence. If someone ignored the demon contained within him or treated him like they did everyone else without bias, Their name went on the short list of people he liked. As the Uzumaki thought about the mechanical arm he confiscated the previous night, the Hyuga watched him from her heightened seat. The blue-haired girl stared at the back of his head, carefully keeping an eye out so she could duck down in feigned embarrassment if anyone noticed her. She knew that, given the lack of self-confidence and self-respect her mask projected, she would be fundamentally attracted to the hyperactive, ever-positive boy. In truth, she actually did kinda like the blonde. He was honest and hardworking even if he was incurably stupid, but there really wasn't a chance that someone like him could get very far in life. It was another sad case of being held back by one's peers that she had seen so many times in the Branch family. She allowed her gaze to shift across the room until it rested on a shameful sight, the Uchiha and his fan club. The girls in her class gave Kunoichis a bad name by fawning over this piece of arrogant crap. He was a brooding asswipe who didn't care about anyone, looked down on everyone, and touted his own pathetic skills as superior in a sad attempt to find self-worth. The squealing fangirls crowding around him were no better. What are they three? She thought with disdain. If you want to be a ninja, be a damn ninja. Don't prostrate yourselves over this fire-breathing turd. As she vented her own internal fury, she forced herself to think about more pleasant things. She actually felt a bit depressed when she realized yet again that there were very few things to be joyous about other than her private work. She couldn't shake the depressing weight of being alone in a world of stupidity. There wasn't anyone she could talk to. Well, there was Shirori and Aikaru, but they were incapable of holding conversations on the level she desired, much less any kind of advanced thought at the moment. She hadn't completely restored them from last night's engagement. As her mind wandered to how she would defeat Curse next time, she found her mood lifting. This is what she lived for. The thrill of competing with someone who wouldn't falter anytime soon. Someone who could potentially understand her plight. Of course, she would prove herself the superior prodigy, but that would come with time. She was shaken out of her thoughts when Irika shouted at a misbehaving Naruto. Remembering that her mask would giggle at the blonde's outbreak, she unconsciously let it escape as a true feeling. Sure, the boy was an idiot, but that was enough for now. Alright guys, the Chunin announced. On the agenda today is practical applications. That means shuriken and taijutsu practice. Outside, he called, prompting the students to slowly abandon their desks and make their way to the doors. The Uzumaki stayed still in his seat while sprawled out over the table before him. He was feigning a pout since his esteemed teacher yelled at him over a hilarious dirty joke he repeated from a jonin he once saw. When the blue-haired Hyuga passed him, he glanced up at her and noted the immediate blush and attempt to hide in her jacket. He chuckled inwardly. It was plain as day that she had a crush on him, and under normal circumstances, he might have considered returning the affection. But there was work to be done, and he knew it. No time for romance. Irika noticed the shy girl awkwardly avoiding his blonde student and smirked. To be young again, he thought, totally falling for their masks. The boy leapt to his feet and rushed out the door behind everyone, and the scarred Chunin followed. Naruto sat in his hidden chamber working on the stolen mechanical arm that afternoon. This thing's incredible, he thought. Nothing short of what silence can do. The false limb was a cavalcade of technology. The interior of the smooth metal was littered with electric wiring, equipment, and weaponry. He managed to extract a saw blade of barbs similar to the deadly top she pulled during the last encounter along with the electrified claws and the fingers. Poison Senbon needles were tucked away in tiny magnetically charged holes hidden by a removable plate, and the batteries he gutted from the upper arm were housed in an incredibly dense alloy that took way too much time to open. Even the way the arm was supposed to be attached to the flesh was brilliant. The transistors and sensors at the shoulder were meticulously laid out to connect directly to the nerves and muscle tissue of the user to give the metal appendage a feeling as natural as an actual arm. Other than the joy he derived from dismantling the device, there really wasn't anything he could copy into his own arsenal. Having a third limb would be painful as hell, seeing as how he'd have to constantly damage his body so the connected nerves wouldn't heal instantly. The space-conserving compartments gave him no ideas since the early part of his life dealt with that very issue. The concept of hidden weapons was also old hat. He once spent the better part of 4 months researching everything he could about the fundamentals of puppetry and battle. While he walked away with extensive knowledge of poisons, chakra strings, and weapons hidden in every corner, the art was ultimately flawed in his eyes. The user would have to carry around a big-ass puppet or a bulky scroll and leave himself open to attack, while focusing on a somewhat distant battle. Sure, he still had the lethal dolls he constructed during those times, but he mainly used them for an automated defense system while he was away. He leaned back on the comfortable cot and reviewed the battle in his head. That spinning top of death was pretty cool, he stated mentally. It let out electricity and reacted wirelessly to those. His train of thought trailed off when he suddenly rushed to one of his lockers and began frantically pulling out various weapons. Silence's new weapon gave him an idea. A child's toy, is it? He mused while setting out the various blades, screws, tags, and miscellaneous items before him. As he began formulating the inner workings in his mind, he silently challenged his rival. Two can play at that game. He spent the rest of the evening constructing his new weaponry and cheered upon completion. The blonde genius ascended the hidden passage into his ratty apartment and produced a foxy grin before nodding off in his bed. He couldn't wait for the next fight. Hinata sat in the smaller secondary lab underneath her room in the Hyuga compound. This dank hole wasn't nearly as elegant as her main chamber, but putting all of one's eggs in one basket was incredibly foolish. She had spent the better part of the afternoon restoring Shirori and Aikuro to their previous status, and now she was working on altering their mechanical equipment. After finishing all the small changes that came to mind, she sat back and wondered what to do about Curse. The guy really seemed to know his seals, and that was something she had, sadly, not paid so much attention to. She fished out one of the old scrolls she had copied from an old Hyuga text in the clan archives from the hole in the uneven stone wall and began reading through it on any information that was specific to her bloodline. There wasn't much, but it gave her an idea. She pulled out several tags from the haphazard stack before her and began scribbling out variations on the caged bird's seal mixed with elements of other marks that she knew off the top of her head. After a few failed attempts, she came up with a crude, yet functional tag. It still contained the central part of the brain-destroying mark, but the outlying area was a combination of an explosive seal and a barrier mark. Theoretically, this seal, when applied to a subject via the tag, would cause extreme pain to the wearer regardless of family affiliation. The small barrier prevented easy removal, although the corners were still unprotected, and if contact was broken after activation, it was set to explode in a small, yet still harmful, fireball. She smirked when she realized that her family's horrendous seal could be put to a professional use other than holding others back. She became alert when the nearby monitor detected her father coming down the hall. She scrambled to the surface and properly set the mat down, thus securing her hidden lab from prying eyes. Her father gave another lecture on proper behavior, strength of the Hyuga, blah, blah, blah. She stopped paying attention as soon as he began and let her mind wander to what else she could create to defeat her prodigy rival. As high as she neared the end of his ignored lecture, she came up with an idea and, once he was far enough away from her room, returned to her crude underground room to begin preparations. As the night went on, she successfully completed a prototype of an experimental weapon she had been working on the past few years. It wasn't particularly strong now, but given enough time it would become a formidable force, one that would turn the shinobi world upside down if it ever got out. She returned to her room above and fell asleep with a smile on her small face. The next encounter was going to be great. 4 days later, Naruto found himself prowling around in the mysterious hive underneath Konoha again. As usual, he was slowly mapping out the extensive tunnel system while secretly hoping to be interrupted by silence. He was dressed in his usual alternative garb with a new addition, a handful of rings on his fingers. Every digit possessed one of the circular ornaments, and tiny storage seals were carved all the way around the thick combat jewelry. Ever since his latest victory against his intelligent rival, he had built a wide array of new weaponry based on her top of death, and he was looking forward to testing them. But as much as he craved an encounter with his nemesis, He was just as interested in why these man-made caverns were here. He had never heard any mention of them even from the Hokage, and all the official and unofficial documents regarding the various shinobi locations produced zip in the way of an explanation. Someone's doing something down here, he concluded. They've gotta be. Now the real question is, who? He shook his head to clear his wandering mind as he came upon a massive circular vertical tunnel. When he stepped into the clearing, he peered up and saw a web of stone bridges extending from other tunnels high overhead. He glanced over the side of his own granite precipice and saw much the same, albeit in the other direction. He backed into the tunnel. He exited while pulling out his map. Observing the rough path he took, he estimated that he was somewhere below the Hokage monuments. Right under the Hokage's nose, he thought smugly, and even the old man doesn't know. This'll be fun. He marked his map appropriately and pocketed the guide before heading back into the descending hole. Hinata decided that today was a day for exploration. She had successfully rebuilt Shirori and Ikaru and left the reassembled Hyugas to their daily tasks of monitoring all her points of interest and filtering out useless or meaningless materials. They might not have been alive in the traditional sense, but they were still incredibly helpful. As she moved through the tunnels, a green LED light thrummed softly on her hip as her electronic guidance system updated itself by calculating her newest route. The nifty little device continuously scanned the surrounding area and fed the data wirelessly to the powerful mapping machine back in her main lab. Her dark blue jacket was warm from all the miniature and not-so-miniature devices strapped on or otherwise built into the tough fabric, and her repaired metal stake launchers gleamed in the dim light. The newest addition to her arsenal was carefully strapped to her left thigh in a slim composite steel holster. The weapon was still underdeveloped in her opinion, as the interior of the machine was ridiculously fragile underneath its custom metal tubing. The simple act of dropping it on the ground could potentially render it useless. She stopped when she reached a break in the dank tunnel that opened into a huge subterranean chamber. The guidance system's small light flashed furiously as its microwaves suddenly had to bounce back from all over the place in the spacious pit. Once it settled down, the Hyuga girl nudged a switch from inside her mask with her nose, and a rough outline of the new location was projected in front of her left eye. She frowned when she noticed that there was an airborne fixture in the map that continuously moved every time the portable device updated. She shut off the projection and peered over the side of her heightened angle and smirked when she saw what was causing the abnormality. She quietly loaded the spike launchers on her arms and took aim at her seemingly oblivious adversary. She wasn't even that surprised when Curse suddenly glanced up and leapt into the air, seeing as how he was a fellow genius who was aware of his surroundings. She fired the exploding metal rods simultaneously and immediately reloaded the second round while reaching for her newest weapon. This was an excellent day indeed. Naruto dodged the shrapnel spikes with relative ease on his airborne route toward silence. When she fired another barrage, he jammed his fingers into a passing bridge and swung himself underneath, using the open walkway as a shield against the splintering metal. When the deadly rain passed, he curled his feet around, placed them on top of the bridge, then flung himself towards his nemesis while drawing his twin broadswords from the seals on his back. Hinata smirked behind her blue mask and immediately pulled the pins to yin and yang, unleashing the electrified bladed top against Curse. She inserted chakra into the wireless controls and manipulated the lethal top with deadly precision against the fellow prodigy when he finally brought himself to her bridge. The blonde boy struck the spinning weapon between the curved blades with both swords, initiating the constant current within the top of death. His muscles locked up due to the sudden rush of electricity through his body and, after a few precious seconds of being stuck, willed his arms to fling the device away. The thing hit the ground and a small set of pins on the side suddenly shot out, launching the spinning machine into the air towards Curse. Shit, he swore as he leapt back to avoid being skewered by the weaponized toy. When the top spun past him and began turning to attack from behind, he touched the large seal on the left side of his back and pulled out a long, thick mahogany staff. When the crackling machine neared him again, he thrust the pole out and the curved blades of yin and yang jammed solidly into the wood, effectively halting the remote weapon's advance. Naruto turned to mock his adversary on the failed attempt, but instead faced another hail of shrapnel rods. He cursed incessantly as the long bolts exploded on his sides and showered him with painful steel slivers. Calling upon the fox's chakra, he managed to forcefully eject the metal pieces as his many wounds smoked shut. "The hell did you do that for?" he shouted at Silence. "What?" she replied playfully. "You look fine to me. Damn you." With that, he raised his hands and applied chakra to the rings on his fingers. The seals on the smooth metal reacted instantly and ejected multiple weapons that appeared to be miniature versions of yin and yang. "That little top of yours gave me an idea. And that would be..." He smirked behind his modified mask. "Yo-yos of death." He demonstrated by launching the toy like weapons at Hinata. Small blades curved out of the edges of the lethal playthings as the blonde sent chakra down the wires that connected the devices to his rings. Silence countered without a second thought by loading another set of shrapnel rods and firing them at the incoming buzzsaws. As the flying metal impacted with the opposing weapons, Curse performed a dance with his arms to manipulate the yo-yos back to their original path. The Hyuga, in turn, reactivated the distant yin and yang and forced its miniature steam engines to pry it loose from the heavy staff. As soon as the blades left the wood, the thing spun along the ground with incredible speed until it tangled itself in the copycat weapons wires. "Damn," Naruto thought as he pulled back on his new armaments, frustrated that his rival already found a flaw with them. An idea struck him, and he began to swing his arms in a circular pattern in front of him. The tangled yo-yos of death reacted to the motion by spinning the same way as the motion transferred down the wires. Within seconds, the tangled metal strands had combined to form one thick cable topped with a chaotic collection of rotating blades. The blonde genius then initiated his next attack by leaping forward, causing the impromptu mess of weapons in front of him to also advance with frightening speed. But Silence was ready for anything. While her nemesis was busy further tangling her top of death within his makeshift cable, he had forgotten one important aspect of yin and yang. As the spinning steel cable of rotating blades neared her, Hinata squatted to the ground and pushed the outer buttons in on her wireless devices. Her remote weapon received the command, and its inner generator began to spin. A moment later, its magnetic field turned on and unraveled the wiring tangled around it. Since this function was primarily meant to ward off any unwanted metal around the wearer, its oppressive field extended for a certain distance before affecting anything. To put it simply, the cables entangling yin and yang were ripped apart as the metal nearest the device were left unharmed while the magnetic field forced away the strands within its influence. "Oh shit," Curse exclaimed as his cable was dispersed and snapped into pieces. He cut off the chakra to his rings, and the wires extending from the seals fell away as the marks deactivated. In a sudden fit of anxiety, the blonde released his favored ninjato from one of the seals in his back. He took a deep stance, his Geta sandals' metal bottoms clanging against the stone floor as he did so. Striking his sword into the earth, the seals along the blade's sides began to glow as the earth below was firmly connected to the cold steel of the weapon. The Hyuga instantly recalled the last time he pulled this move. "Well," she thought, "let's see if this thing's up to snuff." She reached down to her thigh, pulled her experimental weapon from its metal holster, and aimed the slightly curved rod at her rival. She pressed its lone switch with her thumb, and the device began to vibrate as its inner workings spun at an increasing pace. When the air around the slanted tube began to heat to unbearable levels, the device reached its maximum output, and a brilliant light shone through the opening at the front. A moment later, the machine discharged and sent the intense burning light flying towards the blonde. The demon container genius didn't even have time to think when he saw the flash approach him. Instinctively, he dipped into a rather large amount of the fox's chakra, and a visible barrier of evil chakra immediately pooled in front of him. The instant afterward, the superheated light impacted the makeshift shield, and the two amazing forces caused a tremendous shockwave as they imploded in a fantastic display of illuminated heat. Hinata was thrown back a good 10 yards by the blast, and, when she composed herself, noticed her nemesis also suffered the same fate, as he was now bringing himself to his feet clear on the other side of the devastated bridge. "What was that?" she whispered under her breath. "You idiot." Naruto berated her once his dry voice returned. "You almost killed me." "So did you." "I can't believe you made me use that." He referred to the fox's chakra, even though he knew silence wouldn't understand the correlation. "Me? What about you?" "I'll bet every high-level ninja within 100 miles felt that." If only she knew how accurate that prediction was. "Who's there?" A voice called down from above them, instantly attracting their attention. The intelligent preteens shifted their alert gazes to the lone ninja at the top of the vertical tunnel with a mixture of shock and horror before glancing back at each other. As soon as they realized they had been exposed to the world, they made a mad dash for whatever salvageable weapons were laying around and scampered away like their lives depended on it. Commander Takami, a masked underling, appeared before a shadowed figure who was seated on an uncomfortable granite throne. Our forward scout detected a large chakra spike near Sector 8. "Tell me something I don't know," the figure replied in a bored, decidedly female voice. "Any news on the cause?" "Yes, ma'am. Our scout claimed to have seen two masked individuals fighting in the area. Upon discovery, the unknown fighters vacated the scene." "Interesting." Takami leaned forward to reveal a sly smirk adorning her rough lips. "Let's get to know these folks a little better. Alert all squadrons to keep a lookout for them." "Yes, ma'am." With that, the kneeling ninja shimmered out of view. The gruff-sounding woman sat back in her seat. "This is certainly interesting news. I'm sure he'll be as intrigued as I am." An elder man strolled down one of the many halls in the Hokage Tower on his way to one of the numerous conference rooms littering the upper floors. His right side was covered either by bandages or miscellaneous cloth, evidence of a conflict fought long ago, as his features were rough and wrinkled with age. Upon reaching the desired chamber, he opened the door and took his place across from two other individuals in the secured room. "Glad you could join us, Danzo," the elder man greeted. "Good afternoon, Hamura, Koharu," the old warhawk replied. "We assume you are here to discuss the events that transpired in Root's former base of operation?" Koharu began. "Yes. I take it that you also felt that presence." The old teammates nodded. "Several of my subordinates are currently investigating the source, but I believe it's safe to say that whatever it is, it could be disastrous if left unchecked." Hamura spoke up. "I agree completely, but how do you suggest we go about procuring such a power?" "First, we need to locate it. It is only a matter of time until we do so. Such strength can never hide for long." "And what happens after?" the old woman continued. "If we are unable to control it, how shall we dispose of it?" Danzo remained silent for a moment before answering. "I believe our associate is more than capable of handling it." The elders nodded again in agreement. Now that that's out of the way, Hamura began. "There are other matters to discuss." Naruto was as anxious as could be the next day. He hadn't felt such a rush since his first encounter with silence. Who knew being caught would be so exhilarating? His restlessness manifested itself in a constant bouncing of his right leg against the squeaking floorboards under his seat at the academy. "I knew someone was down there," he exclaimed mentally as he reviewed the odd chain of events the previous night. "Now the question is, who could it be? That guy we saw didn't have any obvious headband and operative. Maybe? Perhaps a spy? Nah, a spy would wear a mask or something. This guy made no real attempts to blend in. If he's an outsider, what's his occupation? Then again, if he's from Konoha, what was he doing down there? Gah, all this speculation's giving me a headache." Higher up in the stands, Hinata's thoughts possessed similar content. Now that was an adrenaline rush. She speculated on being discovered. "I wonder if that's what couples feel when they're caught in the act." She giggled at the unusual comparison before recalling the face of the individual who found them. Let's see, he didn't have a village headband, but then he wasn't wearing an Yenbyu mask either. That means the tunnels really are a secret from most of Konoha, since he felt no need to hide his identity, but if he was Yenbyu, that might have been his base of operations. She shook her head at the last thought. She had located the Special Forces' main structure some months ago, and while it also had an extensive tunnel system, it wasn't connected to the mysterious hive she and Curse had been exploring. Wait a minute, she realized. The ANBU Black Ops are an offshoot of another organization. What was it? Root? Yeah, that's it. But it was disbanded some time ago, wasn't it? She shook herself from her inner monologue when she noticed Irika, yet again, berating the blonde boy. Per usual, she giggled a bit at the boy she was supposed to have a crush on and began to wonder if there would ever be anyone for her. Her utmost respect laid with Curse even if he was her rival in the prodigy department. But what would happen if the guy was much older than her and only appeared younger due to his short stature? Such a thing shouldn't matter, but the Hyuga couldn't bring herself to contemplate such thoughts. After all, she was still a girl. As Hinata stewed in silence over her depressing future prospects, the blonde genius sat back in his seat and mentally planned out his day. After classes, he would have to spend several hours pretending to practice with shuriken and such. He still had an image of the village idiot to uphold. Afterwards, a trip to Chiraka's ramen stand would be in order. Seeing as how their noodles were freaking great and the old man's daughter was kinda cute, even if she was too old for him. This last musing caught him unawares on a subject he skirted around quite often. He would tell himself that he was still 12 years old. Romance in his life was still a long ways off, but the simple idea that he would eventually want to settle down one day bothered him. Interestingly enough, it wasn't the notion of having a family that disturbed him rather than who he would be having it with. His ideal girl was, first and foremost, at least intelligent enough to hold a decent conversation with him. Strangely enough, he considered looks to be secondary as long as she wasn't a complete circus freak. After a few solid minutes of daydreaming, he banished such thoughts from his overactive imagination and continued his plans on what to do about the now inhabited secret tunnel system. As the blonde failure drilled ninja stars into wooden targets, Hinata performed her ritualistic stalking of the boy. Occasionally, if the location was rather populous, the Hyuga would decide to exercise her skills in stealth and easily sneak by large crowds of people undetected. Today, however, was not one of those days. She made no obvious effort to stay hidden from her crush should he ever decide to turn around. As usual, Naruto felt her presence behind him anyway. He thought it sad that her life was so oppressive that she secretly leaned on his visage of a moron for emotional support, but what could he do about it? He hammered away at his piss-poor training, almost wincing every time he missed the target, which was painfully often. It angered him to no end that his own village would potentially look down on him despite the fact he was the greatest thing to happen to them since sliced bread, figuratively speaking. When a shuriken finally stuck into the bullseye, he cheered as he usually did and pulled another projectile from his frayed pouch. As he prepared to launch the next ninja star, he chuckled slightly at the notion that his target was Sasuke's brooding face. He decided to show off a bit and expertly launched the weapon dead-on, striking the center of the wooden post right next to his previous scoring hit. The blue-haired girl observing the scenario frowned ever so slightly at this. The Uzumaki boy was notorious for being unskilled as a ninja, but she would notice every so often that he would do something brilliant, even if those moments were brief enough to be attributed to luck. She wondered over this for a moment before deciding that she had stalked the boy enough for the day and started towards home. She had made leaps and bounds in the development of her energy weapon since its first field test, and she longed to work on it some more. The blonde genius felt the girl's presence depart and decided to hang around a bit longer to ensure no one else was watching. When this turned out to be the case, he gathered his weaponry and headed for home. There was much work to be done. The third Hokage was drowning in paperwork as he usually did. "I'm a master ninja, for God's sake," he complained mentally. Not a damn accountant. Why do I have so much paperwork? When he peered up from his desk from what seemed like days, he noticed that the natural lighting in the room was waning. The Earth star was setting, leaving behind a brilliant palette of oranges and yellows that illuminated all they touched. Deciding that a break was in order, Saratobi strolled over to his living quarters within the central tower. When he reached his private room and took a seat on the comfortable couch, He refilled his pipe and took a deep whiff of his oral fixation. He blew a pristine stream of smoke out and began formulating his thoughts on a curious incident from the previous evening. Sometime late last night, he felt a disturbance of some sort. The ground didn't shake, and even the vast majority of the village's elite shinobi noticed nothing, but a seasoned veteran such as he felt it nevertheless. If he were to describe it, he would have likened it to a shockwave, albeit one of chakra as opposed to vibrations in the air. His exceptional ANBU ninjas reported nothing out of the ordinary, which worried him to no end. How could the cream of the crop in the shinobi world not feel something that strong? Even more disturbing was that his former teammates, Hamura and Koharu, also claimed that they experienced no odd sensations. He knew the council was full of shit on this matter, seeing as how their views tended to be narrow-minded at times. In fact, he produced a frightening thought while sucking in another mouthful of tobacco smoke. They might even be in on it. Only question is, what is it? As the elder Hokage continued enjoying his free time, he had another scary idea. What if that was the demon fox? It would certainly describe the aura surrounding it. Then again, the Nine Tails is capable of much more power. The entire village would have felt it if it was releasing chakra. Deciding to take cautionary measures, Sarutobi made his way back to his office and summoned one of his former Yendyu captains, Kakashi Hitaki. Breaking routine, the Jonin actually arrived rather quickly given his reputation of being chronically late. "You called, sir," the high-level ninja said as he puffed into existence. "You're on time for once. Your message said urgent, so I figured it would be good to make time for once." "Noble," he brushed the revelation off. "Did you feel anything strange last night?" Kakashi's lone eye furrowed in a mixture of thought and confusion. "No, sir." "You too." The lead ninja sat back and murmured to the side. "Kakashi, I have a special assignment for you." "Sir." "The parameters are rather vague, so I'll give it to you straight. Last night, I felt a presence of some sort. I don't know whether or not it is hostile or not, but I want you to keep your eyes open for anything out of the ordinary." "Such as?" "I don't know. People not being where they should be, unusual amounts of chakra in places where it doesn't belong, just anything that seems unusual to you." "With due respect, sir, these orders seem..." The copy ninja paused while trying to think of an appropriate way to phrase his concern. "Crazy," he cut him off. "Yes, I know I sound like a senile old man right now, but I have a feeling that erring on the side of caution is necessary this time. Any questions regarding your mission?" "How long is the mission to last?" Sarutobi didn't respond for a moment. Even he barely knew what to look for, much less how to assign it to someone else. "Indefinitely. This mission is merely to be tacked onto your daily routines, so it shouldn't be difficult. If anything turns up, report to me immediately." "Yes, sir." Hinata sat in her makeshift lair underneath her room in the Hyuga mansion, tinkering with her energy weapon. The field test the previous evening informed her of a multitude of issues with the amazing device. First off, she was grateful that she and Curse were interrupted and had to end the skirmish because the battery she installed in the curved handle was bone dry. "This thing takes a ton of power," she mused. "I'm gonna have to improve the batteries or something. I don't really see how I can reduce the energy consumption without also reducing the charge. Maybe if I built a small generator." Her young, intelligent mind began working out the mechanics of such an electrical machine. "Small my ass. There's no way around it, is there? Well, maybe if I repurpose yin and yang." She unconsciously reached for her lethal top before stopping herself. She always left that nifty little weapon in her main lab. Well, nothing else to do, she thought as she climbed up the short shaft up into her room. She exited her secondary workplace and began resetting all her safety measures over the gaping hole before closing it off and placing the ordinary floor mat over the metal door. The moment the mat left her fingers and fell into place with a soft thud, Hinata was startled by a sudden opening of her door. Her head shot over to regard the visitor with wide eyes. "H. Hanabi," she cried, standing up more swiftly than she thought humanly possible. "What are you doing, sister?" She responded, so surprised that an immediate excuse didn't form in her mind. I I tripped on my sandal. You're clumsy, but not that bad. The younger girl retorted. Damn her and her attitude. Was the mat pulled up? Huh. She tried to maintain the illusion of an ignorant klutz by gazing at the mat behind her. And maybe. I might have tripped over it. Hanabi gave a look of dissatisfaction before giving up on the argument. Father wants to see you. Okay. The undercover genius replied as she passed her sibling and started for her father's chamber. Naruto was anxious in his hidden room. Not only was he frustrated at the fact that Silence's newest weapon forced him to rely on the fox for defense, but also by the sudden interruption of the unknown man in the tunnels. His stomach stirred uncomfortably every time he thought about the stranger. I can't deal with this right now. He concluded his evening session and scaled the hidden vertical passage into his room. After properly resealing all the locks, barriers, and traps to his hole, he boiled some water for some instant ramen. After a passable meal, he turned off the lights and lied in his bed, images of days gone by running through his head uncontrollably. Come on, he whined to no one as he tossed and turned. I just want to sleep a little. Even so, slumber still avoided him, and he succumbed to reviewing all the thoughts in his mind. He remembered the first days that he now knew were milestones in his intellectual advancement. One day many years ago, he was playing by his lonesome self when he accidentally released a bit of chakra against the sand under his feet. This mysterious occurrence intrigued him so much that he brought it up to Old Man Hokage who, recognizing the effects as basic chakra manipulation, informed the young child that he had real potential. Excited by the prospects of learning even greater things, the blonde continued to hone his small skills on his own. When he was of proper age, he enrolled himself into Konoha's Ninja Academy. He had learned off the bat some extremely basic chakra exercises and tried them out in the privacy of his own home, and that was when things changed. The third time he tried a simple exercise in control was his first brush with the demon fox sealed within him. It wasn't so much an encounter as it was him happening by a strange voice in his head that spoke independently from himself. At first, Naruto thought it was normal for ninjas to hear things, but then his interactions with the other students eventually led him to understand that this was not the case. After this revelation, the budding prodigy believed for a while that he was going insane, as the strange, deep voice in his mind would constantly berate him and suggest he perform incredible acts of cruel torture and heinous murder. Then one night, the Uzumaki genius finally confronted the foreign voice. When it responded to his questions and demands, the boy finally realized that this spiteful entity was none other than the nine-tailed fox itself. Once he understood that he housed the powerful demon, he wept hard that evening in the knowledge that that was why he was treated with such disdain from everyone. He thought about bringing it up with a third Hokage, but decided against it. In his years, he had learned that, somehow, people heard everything regardless of how quietly it was spoken. If the villagers knew that he was finally aware of what was in him, they might try to kill him in a bout of vigilante justice. That would not do. On that night so long ago, Naruto vowed to himself to become the greatest shinobi in the village, nay, the world, and prove to everyone just how vain and conceived they were to assume his worth based on events beyond his control. The fact that his brilliant mind absorbed knowledge like a sponge was merely an aid for his goal. With that memory, the boy's eyes could stay open no longer, and he drifted off into the unbiased arms of slumber. Hinata was returning to her room from her overbearing father's chamber. She was fuming inwardly at his incessant negative remarks. He summoned her merely so he could order her not to fail the genin exam coming up in the next 2 days, and nothing more. I'll show you one day, old man, she shrieked mentally. I'll show all of you how big an asshole every one of you are. She checked her ranting in favor of going to bed when she slid open her door and found a sight horrifying to her lavender eyes. Hinata, what is this? Hanabi asked as she pointed to the metal door leading to the older Hyuga's secret lab. I don't know, she replied with as much shock as she could muster. Her mind was in a mix of panic and rage at her snob sister. Why is it in your room? I have no idea, Hanabi. She tried to sound nervous as she approached her younger sibling while drawing a small syringe from a pouch in her clothing. Does father know about this? The small girl asked while gazing at the floor. I don't think so, she responded before leaning next to her sister and sticking the needle into her neck. As soon as she injected the cocktail into Hanabi, she continued, and neither will you. The genius Hyuga moved swiftly to shut the door to her room and replace the mat before attending to her drugged sister. She propped the little girl against the wall and stared straight into her drooping eyes. You will not remember this, she spoke eerily to the child. You will wake up, and everything will be normal. Do you understand? When the question was met with a dozing nod, she said, Repeat what I said. Everything will be fine tomorrow. The younger sister replied like a quiet drunk. There is nothing wrong. You will forget about all this. It is a bad dream. This is just a dream. I'll wake up from. She trailed off before she could finish her statement and fell into a deep sleep. All right, let's get you to bed, Hinata said with resolution as she hiked the snoozing girl onto her shoulders and quietly made her way to the siblings' room to deposit her. I hope this hypnotism stuff works. As Danzo dismissed a handful of his root followers, Koharu and Hamura approached him in his desolate office. The room was devoid of character, as furniture consisted of a single desk and chair. Filing cabinets or fixtures that otherwise stored documents were nowhere to be seen, as the very nature of the organization was unofficial, and publicly holding records of its actions was unheard of. Any news on the presence? Hamura began. The old war hawk shook his head. Not as of yet, but my subordinates have found traces of another. Another person? Koharu interjected. Yes, although there is a significant lack of information on them as well. All my forces can find is evidence of 2 combatants and no more. Nothing to indicate identity. I see. Any word from our associate? Just our standing orders. It appears he has not taken these intruders into account in our plans. As if the elder people's minds were read, a root member shimmered into view before them in a kneeling position. Sir, the masked ninja stated, a message for you. He held out an envelope and, upon being relieved of it, disappeared from the secured room. Hamura's brow furrowed at the means of which the letter was stored. An envelope? Why does he insist on using such arcane forms of delivering messages? It sticks out like a sore thumb. Danzo ignored the observation while he silently read the folded letter from the package. Upon finishing, he handed the letter off to the elders and said, It appears we now have new orders regarding these 2. As Sarutobi's former teammates simultaneously read the paper, Koharu voiced the important bits. Recruits said involved individuals upon discovery or, should there will be not for the common good, terminate their terms of employment and proceed with the operation as planned. Once she saw the dated signature at the bottom, she followed protocol and burned it with chakra-induced flames. Danzo, I would appreciate it if you would inform us of new occurrences before reporting them to him. I'm sorry, the old shinobi said with mild confusion. He knew there was more than one intruder. What is disturbing about that is I have not submitted a report to him yet. He has somehow figured out the presence of another all on his own. The elder council members merely furrowed their brows in concern before exiting the hidden office. Their associate was proving to be more than met the eye. Shirori and Aikiru had been busy for what seemed to be forever. Apparently, they had been working for several days, as their mistress had informed them she was taking a day off for preparations after a sizable workload. Usually, that meant she was taking a breather from her time-consuming work, but this day was being set aside for acts of espionage. The reassembled Hyugas noticed quite a few camera signals being set up on their concealed line, and immediately knew what their leader was up to. As they brought new monitoring equipment online, tapped them into the new cameras, and began the extensive recording, they also performed the task given to them that took high priority as of 1 day ago. For some reason or another, Hinata had ordered them to sift through the many radio signals from Konoha in search of anything out of place. They heartily obeyed their savior and got to work on it, but nothing unusual reared its head. There was the normal chatter from all the ninja teams operating within the village, the confidential messages being broadcasted from the intelligence department and ANBU headquarters, and the occasional civilian contractor barking out irrelevant things. They honestly had no idea what their mistress wanted, so they saved all the classified stuff in the hopes that they would be useful one day. Hey, Shirori, Ikura whined. I'm bored. Let's do something. Shut it, stupid. We have to follow mistress's orders. But I gotta live sometime. You're not alive to begin with. You're so mean. It's the truth. As the two's argument degraded into something totally juvenile, the recorder on one of the low-frequency radios picked up a quiet scratch of a conversation. When a pause in the reassembled Hyuga's discussion was filled with a codename foreign to their ears, they broke off and listened in. After several minutes, the static-ridden conversation ended, and Shirori turned to her partially alive comrade with a look of triumph. See? That is why we hang around. Fine. He conceded defeat and sat down to filter through the recording and decipher as much as he could. When the Genin exam finally rolled around, Hinata and Naruto were unconcerned about it. Not so much out of confidence in their abilities, but rather their preoccupation with other more important matters. The Uzumaki, as he predicted, failed the test for the third time. Truthfully, he didn't care all that much about the results, mostly because he was physically incapable of performing the useless technique of making non-corporeal clones. Figures, he mused, just my luck that the deciding move would be one I can't manage. I'm telling ya, it hurts like shit trying to compress my chakra down to a damn clone that can't do anything. He shook his head to clear his complaints while sitting dejectedly on the swing outside the academy. Anyways, I've got bigger things to worry about. Since I failed, there's not much use in training tonight, so I think it's time for a little extra exploration. He was broken from his thoughts by one of the teachers, Mizuki. The Hyuga was disinterested in the new headband that was tied around her neck. Everything in the academy was so incredibly simple that it would be impossible for her to not pass its simple test, but even so, she was thinking about the work she had set up for that evening. Out of the corner of her lavender eyes, she noticed Naruto seated on a swing, looking as glum as a human could. Poor guy. She felt sorry for him. He works so hard, but is held back every time. I mean, come on, there are other students who've passed without being able to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. Her eyes narrowed when she noticed the blonde boy vacate the scene with Mizuki, but she dismissed it without a second thought. Either way, I've got a lot of crap to sift through tonight. May as well get started. It had been a long night for the demon container. He was just getting home from his alternative exam, also known as assisting that bastard Mizuki betray the village. On the plus side of everything, he learned that his benevolent teacher, Irika, was far more sympathetic than he had initially realized, going so far as to take numerous hits for him. His respect for the man skyrocketed that evening. To accentuate the benefits of that night, the blonde boy had also gotten a good look at the Forbidden Scroll. He had learned the incredibly useful shadow clone technique, which proved surprisingly difficult to learn without assistance, and also taken a gander at a few other moves instructions, although he didn't have enough time to try them out. Things were definitely looking up. He was disappointed that all this great stuff had burned through his evening and robbed him of a chance to further explore the hive beneath Konoha, but he was satisfied at a job well done nevertheless. He decided to eat some instant ramen and hit the hay. Unbeknownst to Naruto, Hinata was also having a breakthrough, albeit of another variety. After sending Shirori and Ikuru on their routine patrol, she had sat down to sift through a variable mountain of data her subordinates had collected in her absence. While there was no lack of notable points, such as some ANBU assassination missions and an assignment to cover up an affair the Fire Lord had been having, there was nothing that pertained to what she was really looking for. Many hours had passed since she began, and she was about to call it a night when she came across a transcript that had been buried in the pile. Damn it, Ikuru, she mumbled. The document was incorrectly filed, an action which screamed of the male reassembled Hyuga. I gotta teach him that this isn't how. Her complaints were silenced as she began to read through the thing. She suddenly tore through the handful of pages to find the documentation on the radio conversation. Upon locating it, she leaned across her expansive desk and pulled the recording that corresponded with the written statement, then played it back. Much of the conversation was garbled and interrupted by long bouts of static, but the audible portions were understandable. Her lavender eyes widened when she realized it was a report of some sort. Dual to base. The recording crackled as Hinata read along in its incomplete transcript. Come in. HQ dual report. Over. No sign of Zeta class threat. Over. Copy. Any else? Over. Roger. Traces more than one individual. Copy that. Your shift yet? A third, gruff female voice interrupted the dialogue. Keep line clear, fuck. Yes, Commander. Yes, ma'am. The leader's authoritative voice spoke one last time. Dual. Return. HQ. The double. More work from Lord. Over. Yes, ma'am. Over. While there was more chatter on the recorded channel, the Hyuga genius found this tidbit far more revealing than the rest of the captured transmission. Inuit, she exclaimed as she slammed her hands on the table and rose with a look of triumph. Those guys are taking orders from someone, and something's going down. After her moment of victory, she placed all the documentation back where it belonged and trudged back to her oppressive home to catch some Z's. Jen and teams were going to be announced the next morning, and she didn't want to be dead tired. Besides, she had an image of a prim and proper shy girl to uphold. Hinata's morning had been interesting so far. As planned, she arrived at the academy early and took her seat high in the stands to await the team assignments. She anticipated for the day to be rather dull, but all her expectations went out the window the instant she saw Naruto enter the room wearing an official ninja headband. What's this? She wondered, her brow furrowing ever so slightly in thought. When did he pass? I know he failed the test, so perhaps he retook it? No, no one would allow that. However he did it, I think I'll have to keep an eye on him. The Uzumaki was, likewise, having an unusual day. Well, more like a frustrating one. Pretty much everyone expressed disbelief that he passed with them despite their total inferiority. Seriously, he complained inwardly. Why can't the academy filter students out more efficiently? Hell, maybe the village hidden in the mist had the right idea. He mused, recalling the Blood Mist, village's novice ninja test of the graduating class fighting to the death in a battle royale. He was shaken from his thoughts when Irika began calling out teams. The blonde was mortified that he was stuck with Sakura and Sasuke, two of his most hated people in the entire city. It didn't help matters when the Uchiha told him to stay out of his way. As if this fire-spewing fuck's going to last on his own, he ranted mentally, barely checking the urge to pull a sword from one of his tattooed seals and slice the boy's head off. If it was just Sakura, I could handle it, he reasoned. But to have both of them on the same squad, what did I ever do to deserve this? The Hyuga, however, wasn't quite as displeased with her new comrades. Shino was definitely the better of the two, as his analytical skills were exceptional for his age, and he kept his emotions sealed up like an ideal ninja. Kiba, on the other hand, was a wild card. To be sure, he had unique prospects in his techniques that could make him deadly merely because his moves were unorthodox, but his strategizing self was damn near nothing. Plus, he stunk to high heaven. No amount of deodorant could cover his scent. The closet geniuses got up with everyone else and took a lunch break. Their Jonin squad leaders were going to pick up their respective teams later that afternoon. The Konoha prodigies had no idea what was in store for them. Kakashi was enjoying his evening as much as he could. He had already met and dispersed his genin team for the day to prepare for his infamous spell test the next day, and he was kicking back by reading one of his favorite adult novels. He had expected to be charged with the Uchiha boy due to his grafted-on Sharingan eye, but the Uzumaki boy had thrown him for a loop. Thinking back to the unofficial mission the Hokage gave him, he also recalled hearing rumors on how the blonde child failed the initial exam, then miraculously passed via alternative means. Lord Hokage mentioned that Naruto passed by learning the shadow clone technique. He mused while reading. Not only that, but he managed to create far more than I could ever hope to. I think I should keep my eye on him. he concluded and brushed the subject to the side. The Bell test would determine whether or not he should continue this obscure line of evidence. Little did the copy ninja know that there was one other Jonin instructor going through a similar thought process. Kurina Yuhi was contemplating a strange feeling she had from earlier that day. When she picked up her team of novice ninjas, she immediately recognized Hinata, whom she chaperoned in her earlier days as a shinobi. She felt sorry for the downbeaten girl due to her depressing household and overbearing family. While she was going through formal introductions with her potential pupils, a small tingling feeling formed in her gut. The genjutsu user was not a superstitious person by a long shot. She believed in logical decisions as well as human emotions based on dire situations. While she prided herself on her rather extensive repertoire of all-around knowledge, occasionally she had a gut feeling that told her things were just off. This day was one of those days. The unsettling sensation came around when Kurenai eyed Hinata for a few lingering seconds. For whatever reason, she felt like there was some kind of illusion being cast around the girl, not a complicated projection, but it was as if there was some object on the girl that was being protected in some way by the ninja art of genjutsu. She couldn't be certain, but the red-eyed woman felt the minuscule knot in her stomach would not come undone until she had put her mind at total ease. Her final test would provide an opportunity to look into it. Danzo made his way down the old, familiar hallway within the Hokage Tower to meet with the elders. Per usual, Koharu and Hamura were awaiting patiently in their secured dwelling. Danzo, Koharu began when the old war hawk was seated. "We need to talk about our associate." "I am fully aware of your concerns," he answered immediately as if he expected the topic to be brought up, "and I can assure you that we still hold the upper hand." "How can you be so sure?" Hamura interjected. "This whole business revolves around secrets. It is unwise to assume that we know everything." "I agree," the elderly woman added. "There are things that we haven't even told him, and he seems to know about them anyway." Danzo didn't respond right away. He mulled over everything in his mind before formulating a quick plan of action. "Consider this. Our associate is but one man that we know of. Despite his seeming omnipresence, we know he cannot possibly be everywhere at once. He is physically incapable of such an act. What if he uses shadow clones?" Hamura conjectured. "We have never seen the true extent of his abilities. Hell, we haven't even seen his face. We don't even know if it's truly a he. Besides that," Koharu continued, "how do you know he does not have spies within our city? Or even within our own shinobi ranks?" "That is impossible." The scarred man defended his position. "All my subordinates are accounted for, and there are no extra heads. There aren't even any additional normal ninjas within Konoha. He has no one on the inside." "What about civilians?" "Civilians would be pointless. They don't have access to any information regarding shinobi material." "How about if they are ninjas in disguise?" Hamura offered. "There have been accounts, if rare, of individuals with extraordinary skills who have been able to hide in plain sight. Like our two phantoms," the elder councilwoman finished. The war hawk merely nodded his head in thought. He would never admit it, but these two fossils had a point. Their associate was a Rubik's Cube of infinite size, a person with no face, no name, and no identity to speak of. The only means of communication with the figure was through letters written to them in arcane lettering and delivered in antique envelopes. They didn't even really have a sure way to speak back. He somehow knew what they were discussing no matter the secrecy of their meetings. His train of thought was interrupted by a knock at the door. Without a needed response, a masked root member entered the room, clutching yet another envelope in his hand. "Sir, another message." Not saying a word, Danzo accepted the package and read its contents. His eye widened at the words in the document, and his head shot over to the underling. Did you see his face?" "No, sir. Regular pickup as usual." "I see." He calmed himself down. "Dismissed." After the masked ninja departed and the door shut, Koharu inquired as to the source of the war hawk's sudden concern. "What does it say?" "It says not to worry too much about secrets. We know all we need to." Rather odd thing to write. Hamura rubbed his chin. Is that all? I don't think you understand, Danzo explained further. He's saying not to worry. He's talking about the conversation we're having right now. 2 days later, Naruto was busy during the daylight hours performing chores under the guise of missions. It irritated him that he was performing mere tasks that the villagers were too damn lazy to do themselves, but considering how close he came to not passing Kakashi's bell test, he was elated that he was doing any official ninja work at all. The blonde genius immediately understood what the one-eyed shinobi was pushing: teamwork. He knew that the real test wasn't in obtaining the bells, but rather interacting with his team in the process. While he had full confidence in his own skills, he was honestly worried at one point that they would fail due to the sheer arrogance of the Uchiha and the mindless crushing of the pink-haired banshee. It all turned out well in the end, but it did little to satiate his anger towards Sasuke. I swear, he thought lightly, I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna black out in a fit of rage one day and murder him. His annoyance for Sakura wasn't much better, but she was tolerable at her worst. The urge to remove her head from her shoulders wasn't as strong. To be sure, some days he felt like clocking her cold whenever she got on a roll about how great the Uchiha was and how much of a loser he was, but doing so would only bring his cover into question. Speaking of which, he mused on a more serious matter. Kakashi's no pushover. He doesn't do it much, but I notice him eyeing me from time to time. Either he's a pedophile with a thing for blondes, or, he continued with a tinge of fright, he's caught onto me somehow, damn it. It's probably that mass shadow clone technique I pulled. Attracts attention. He smirked at the ironic situation. The one exceptional move he learned in public had the potential to blow his concealed genius. Looks like I'll have to be extra careful from now on. Unbeknownst to the Uzumaki, Hinata was having a strangely similar time dealing with her own instructor. The girl kicked herself mentally when she first met with Kurenai as a genin and noticed the genjutsu user's eyes furrow for a fraction of an instant when looking her way. Damn pouch! She berated herself for carrying around the wrapped piece of cloth that held small instruments such as hypodermic needles and scalpels. I should have left it at home that day. I'm pretty sure she noticed the genjutsu seals around it no matter. I just have to watch what I'm carrying. As she continued in her mindless chore of an assignment, her mind wandered to other more important things. I checked up with Shirori and Ikaru, but they haven't seen anything on the monitors about Naruto. The guy does his missions, trains till he drops, then goes home. How the hell did pass the genin exam? It's not like it's hard, but he's failed twice before doing that exact same routine. Why is this time any different? I may have to do some more in-depth research. As Kurenai observed her novice team working away in their training, she sat back against her tree to take in the cool air. The sky was blue with only a few pristine white clouds dotting the horizon, and the breeze was lukewarm in the summer sun. As her eyes drifted between Shino, Kiba, and his dog, and Hinata, her analytical brain began to crank away at that funny feeling she had a few days prior. Is it possible that I'm just paranoid? She wondered. They're only genin, but those three worked themselves to the bone during my test. Funny thing about it though, Hinata didn't seem to be as tired as she let on. It's like she was acting or something. She paused for a moment when she noticed said Hyuga performing her duties without error. She's a hard-working girl, but she doesn't have any confidence to speak of. Such a thing would naturally come about from faltering in every little thing. But she's made no mistake so far. In fact, she outperforms Kiba and Shin in terms of efficiency. She concluded her musings to step in when Shino approached her and announced that they were finished. When his teacher strode over to the Inuzuka and the Hyuga, the young bug user was having thoughts of his own. When they had passed the survival test and truly became a team, he planted a single insect on each member of his squad so he could keep tabs on them in case of emergency. What bothered him was that the bug assigned to Hinata returned mere hours later in a severely disorientated state. Its movements and communication patterns were highly erratic, he mentally reviewed, indicative of contact with one of the very few substances that are poisonous or otherwise harmful to my insects. What is most bothersome is that we keep those substances closely guarded. Only the Hokage should know about them in case of insurgency. Why would Hinata know anything about them? He decided to dismiss any further contemplating on the subject. He had little to no evidence relevant to the situation. That night, Naruto was roaming the tunnels as he so enjoyed. He had made his way to what he called the hub, the massive cylindrical chamber where he last fought silence, and chose a connecting hole at random somewhere near the top. He was about a half hour down the desolate stony passage when he decided to stop and take out his map. After marking the piece of paper up, he figured he was somewhere near an adjoining tunnel of the ENBU headquarters. He folded the parchment up and placed it back in his camouflage jacket when his masked head suddenly shot around when he felt a presence. His azure eyes, hidden behind lenses of one-way mirrors, found something entirely unexpected, a handful of masked men. The newcomers wore the visages not uncommon within the ENBU ranks, but they also wore shrouds that covered their bodies from the neck down. "State your business here," the lead man demanded while grasping a hilt protruding from the cloak. The blonde genius stood and faced the three ninjas with firm resolve. His appearance was certainly jarring as the red mane that covered his hair made him seem more demonic than human. "They call me Curse," he answered apathetically. "What is your business here?" For a moment, the masks turned slightly and bounced as the shinobi nodded in agreement of something. The commanding man spoke again. "Were you involved with the recent chakra spike?" "What if I was?" he returned smugly. "Then we are instructed to offer you employment in our organization." He raised an eyebrow behind his modified mask. "Employment? What organization?" "I cannot say until you are with us." "Fine. I'm in." "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You have to be inducted and your loyalty proven to lie with us." "No can do." "Then you are a threat and must be neutralized." With that, the trio of shrouded ninja shot forward, all three drawing swords from their cloaks. Naruto instantly responded by placing his palms over the seals on his triceps, then flinging his hands down his arms, unleashing a wave of shuriken through the normally sealed slits in the long sleeves. As soon as his limbs were outstretched from the movements, he poured chakra into the rings on his fingers, and a handful of deadly yo-yos flew out just behind the ninja star barrage. The lead ANB-like man swung his sword, and the force of the following wind batted away the shuriken, but the wires attached to the lethal toys spun around the blade and, when the buzzsaws inside the devices made contact with the weapon, shredded it into several large pieces. He tossed the useless sword aside and tossed a handful of kunai at Curse. The Uzumaki reeled the yo-yos back into the marks on the rings and pulled a spiraling metal spear from one of the seals in his back, then knocked the incoming knives away before thrusting it forward and missing the lead ninja. He swung the pike back towards himself to successfully block the other two shinobi's blades, but left himself open to the third man who had maneuvered behind him. The unhindered enemy wrenched a slimmer blade from under his arm and struck at the blonde in one motion. Curse kicked his leg up just in time for the opponent's blade to clash against the metal plate screwed into his Geta sandals before pushing off. The moment he kicked his protruding leg out, he launched himself up and brought the business end of the spear down on the man while kicking his armored feet out at the duo behind him. The ninja, now to his front, had, in the course of Naruto's split-second travel through the air, unleashed a second slim blade and caught the heavy spear's sharp point with both mini swords. He grit his teeth behind his ivory mask due to the major impact of the shaft weapon, which was strong enough to create cracks in his small blades before pushing the mysterious intruder away and onto his waiting comrades. The other two immediately slid their long blades free from the armored sandals and sliced into Curse's torso, only to have the prodigy disappear in a puff of smoke. Shadow Clone, the leading ANBU lookalike, yelled before spinning on his heel to cover his weak point. His comrades followed suit by pressing their backs to his in a basic triangle defense formation that covered all directions in the dim tunnel. "Where'd he go?" one of the subordinates whispered, his efforts to sense any nearby chakra failing miserably. "Just keep your eyes open," the head masked man ordered calmly. "He probably used the clone as a decoy to make an escape." "Or not," a voice from above countered softly before a pair of armored feet landed on the unfortunate subordinates' heads, immediately trailed by a pair of curved kunai slashing the men's throats. As the recently departed men slumped to the ground, the assumed commander leapt back while tossing his twin blades at Naruto. Said blonde flipped the exotic knives in his hands and caught the incoming swords with the iron loops at the other ends of his weapons' hilts. Done, he mocked as he sheathed the curved kunai into his arm seals, pulled out his Injato, and went into a low stance to await his opponent. "You monster. Damn monster," the leader cursed as he pulled a scroll used for seals from under his cloak. "You'll pay for—" He never finished his sentence. Instead, his body suddenly stiffened, then went loose and fell to the ground. The Uzumaki noticed a series of hair-thin throwing knives embedded along the dead man's spine before glancing up and finding their owner. What he found surprised him far more than the unexpected trio. Gee, greetings. A small girl, who couldn't have been more than 9 years old, stood a few yards behind the still-warm corpse. Her interlocking fingers twitched as they fidgeted mere inches away from her face, and she tried to duck her head into her shirt. Her brown hair was neatly pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she wore a large gray raggedish shirt with skin-tight shorts of similar material. Her dull leather belt held 2 large rectangular pouches on both sides and 10 worm-like pieces of intricate metal on the front. She bowed deeply as if she forgot about the formality. "And my name, is Shia." Curse didn't relax his guard. Despite the girl's projected innocence, she had just killed an Yenbu look-like without any issues. She had to be dangerous. "Curse," he answered. "What's your business?" She continued to fidget. "I heard you say you were responsible for that chakra spike a while ago. Is that true?" "Damn." She stutters as badly as Hinata. "What's her deal?" he thought before replying. "Yeah, what of it? You looking to hire me too?" "Oh," she yelped in surprise at the statement as if she never considered it. That would be good. Would you like to help us?" "Help who?" Her eyes dimmed a bit as she looked down in disappointment. "I guess that's a no-go." She suddenly brightened up. "Oh, well. I still have my orders." "And they are?" To exterminate any threats." She smiled with a blush before something primal changed in her facial features. "What the hell?" Hinata wondered. "How did I get into this situation?" The blue-haired girl followed up on her mental whining by firing another set of her shrapnel spikes. The metal rods traveled to the nearest masked man and exploded in a hail of steel shards. The man dodged most of the shots but took a number of hits in the leg. "Curse he is not," she thought smugly. These guys had nothing on her little bag of tricks. The ANBU look-alike, who she had just nailed, slid to the ground to pull free the slivers in his limb while one of his buddies covered him, and the other charged the Hyuga while running through a series of hand seals. The white-eyed girl watched his fingers carefully, then acted swiftly. "Eat this," the charging ninja yelled when his hands suddenly crackled with frost. It was a mixture of water and wind elements to create some kind of ice-based technique. He came within striking distance, then thrust his right arm forward while holding the other back for defense. The prodigy's response was simply to reach out and jab a few points along the man's arm, nullifying the chakra in the affected limb. The shinobi cursed and, in the heat of the moment, threw his other arm out only to have it impact something sharp. While the enemy was caught up in his move, he failed to notice another set of spikes loading into Hinata's launchers. He cursed mentally and reflexively pulled his arm back, but it was too late. The moment his flesh cleared the metal, the projectile shot forward with a blast of burning steam and was firmly embedded in the man's arm. A moment later, the rod exploded and rendered the limb nothing more than a hunk of dangling meat and bone. The genius girl followed up on the counterattack by jabbing the man in the neck, sending a pulse of chakra to his spine and severing every nerve in the essential backbone. She let the man crash to the ground as his body went into shock and advanced onto the recovering pair. The man guarding his injured buddy lifted his mask a bit to reveal his mouth and spit forth a steady stream of fire. Without skipping a beat, the Hyuga genius ducked and planted her palms on the cold stone of the ground, invoking a solid wall of dirt and granite to rise and block the flames. When it was over, the impromptu soil shield crumbled away, leaving a very much unharmed prodigy staring down the ANBU wannabes through an unbroken mask. The injured ninja pulled out the last of the slivers and attempted to stand. The moment her hobbled onto his foot, though, a cutlass was thrust through his heart from behind, ensuring a bloody death. Gurgling blood before passing on, the shinobi slumped to the ground while the large sword slid out of him as he fell away. "Who the fuck are you?" the final opponent shouted in surprise as he turned to attack the newcomer. In a fit of rage, he buried his sword into the large figure's clavicle with no results. The new enemy merely glanced at the offending blade with disinterest before stabbing its owner with his own large sword and yanking upwards, gutting the man like a fish. When the dead masked man crumpled to the ground, the stranger grasped the blade in him and pulled it out as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. Hinata was more than shocked to see this guy. Not only was he apparently of a group separate from the ANBU like ninjas, but also he didn't react in any way to the weapon embedded in him. "Who are you?" she asked with a firm voice. "I am called Fumetsu," he replied with a deep, uncaring voice. He was an unshaven, stocky man who wore what could only be described as a ratty poncho with a short-brimmed hat to match. His long shirt and pants matched the crappy brown material of the rest of his clothes and were held in place by a similarly colored leather belt. The only remarkable thing about his outfit was the steel-tipped ebony combat boots partially hidden by the scraggly ends of his pants. "I take it you were involved with that large presence a while ago?" "That's right," she responded while lightly grasping her energy weapon. There was no question that this guy was dangerous. "I have been ordered to neutralize any and all threats." He raised his large cutlass at her. "We will finish this now."
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.